Welcome to our 10th webinar of the series 2020, a year without public space under the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Hendrik Tieben, and with Luisa Bravo, founder of Journal of Public Space, we initiated this series. We started with the first webinar in early May, and now we reached July, and still there's no sign that the pandemic will disappear soon. So we're still continuing our discussions. And as a tradition, the second Thursday always of the month, we dedicate to a session on innovative approaches and creative practices in response to the pandemic. So this is what we will do today. And before I pass the word to Luisa Bravo, who will then introduce all our different speakers and the topic, I want to explain how you can get in touch with us. So during the session, you can send us at any time your questions with the Q&A function of Zoom. And my colleagues, Ying Chen and Stephanie Cheung, they both will help to select questions, and we will use some of those questions then for the roundtable discussion. Besides, you can also contact us if you have any idea for future sessions. So if there's any issue, for example, that we haven't addressed yet, and you think it would be worthwhile discussing, we would be very happy to hear from you. You can also write us if you are interested to become a speaker in one of the panels. Before we start, I also want to announce already at the beginning our next webinar next Thursday. In that session, we will explore the interplay of the analog and the virtual realm and its effects on public and social life. And this session will be hosted by the Department of International Urbanism of the University of Stuttgart and bring together different people from urbanism, experts on digital tools and social media. So this will be a new facet, a new component which we haven't discussed yet. In case you have missed any of the earlier webinars, you can watch those, the videos of those webinars on our YouTube channel. And that's all from my part for today. And I pass now the word to Luisa Bravo to introduce the speakers and the details of today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Hendrik, and welcome to all the speakers and all the attendees to this very interesting webinar today, which is, as Hendrik mentioned, the third webinar dedicated to innovative approaches and creative practices in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The previous two webinars related to this topic were very successful, and we got so many inspiration and very good energy and positive thinking, since this is something that actually I think we need during this very long and very stressful pandemic. So with this session, actually, we would like to introduce creative practices and how they are dealing with this lockdown and these physical distancing measures and restrictions taking place everywhere at the global level. And for this session, we have invited scholars and practitioners from United Kingdom, United States, Australia, Italy, and the Netherlands. So I'm sure this will be a very rich discussion, as we had in the two previous webinars. And today we will try also to address during the roundtable discussion public space as a space for democracy, freedom of expression and civil rights. And we will try also to tackle all current issues related to public space and what's going on in different countries. So now we start with all the presentations, and I give the floor to the first speaker, Martin Zebracki, who is an associate professor of critical human geography at the University of Leeds in the United Kingdom. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invite, for hosting this event. Queer artivism under COVID-19. I put a still from a Second Life here, a snapshot taken by a user of Pride Festival organized in Second Life. And to me, this summarizes the points I would like to make today around this health crisis, COVID-19, in creativity, intersectional solidarity that moves beyond sexual identity issues. And we also see a clear reference to Black Lives Matter and a digitally networked publicness that has been reinforced under COVID-19. I would like to start with a note on what queer artivism is, and then attend to COVID-19 and the digitally mediated spaces of queer artivism. And I will mention some key points before concluding with a note on the revaluation of public art today. So first of all, the queer artivism I see as arts practices.
Martin, sorry, we cannot see your screen. You have to share again your screen.
I hope this works.
Okay, now we see. Yes, now we see your screen. Thanks.
Okay, sorry for the glitch. I see as arts practices in public accessible sites which address or redress social marginalization through galvanizing critical thought and promoting inclusive change, unquote. So queer here I see as a creative tool, both in concept but also in practice, that I think is very useful in combating the COVID-19 situation, and also facilitating creative responses. What is important here is, again, this focus on more than sexual identity alone, so intersectional perspective, but also intersectional solidarity that intersects sexual identity, but also other social identity markers, including gender, age, ethnicity, geographical origin, religion, and so on and so forth is key. And in queer approaches and queer theory, I've been inspired by the queer collective Mary Nardini Gang, and they phrase queer as follows, quote, "Queer is not merely another identity that can be tacked onto a list of neat social categories, nor the quantitative sum of our identities. Rather, it is the qualitative position of opposition to presentations of stability, an identity that problematizes the manageable limits of identity. Queer is a territory of tension defined against the dominant narrative of white, hetero, monogamous patriarchy, but also by an affinity with all who are marginalized, otherized, and oppressed," unquote. So in that sense, I've construed public artivism as an attempt to challenge social structures that may preserve, underplay social inequalities and dominant uses of public spaces that have invisibilized the socially marginalized. And in that sense, I connect it to a politics of activism as conceptualized by Castor, and where politics, moving on to Ronquier, is an aesthetic in that it makes visible what had been excluded from a perceptual field, and that it makes audible what used to be inaudible, unquote. And we see this visibilization of the invisibilized as well under COVID-19. And what it also raises is a question around the spatial politics of questioning, reference to query, to put in question, how to commemorate LGBTQ plus history, memorialize victims of anti-LGBTQ plus violence, and promote social inclusivity through public art. And this is a question that also underpins my research project, Queer Memorials. But moving into COVID-19, I have a few notes that I would like to share with you. So COVID-19 and the digitally mediated spaces for queer artivism reveal some points around community building. So there are sexual and gender minorities, in some places they're still very much oppressed. But what we have seen in light of the cancellations of Pride events in the offline world is that it has opened up opportunities for marginalized and excluded communities to connect. So to re-find this sphere of intimacy, of a safe space through digital platforms for queer prides. And yeah, the global pride is one example thereof that I will touch upon more here. And an important notion here is co-creation. Co-creation, so beyond, across spaces, across time zones, we co-create works, we connect through public art, and some communities have been impacted by COVID-19 more or disproportionately than others, and in particular people of color who have found each other not only online, as we've seen, but also in offline demonstrations. But through creative acts, there is the hope to trigger social change and more inclusivity and the case for social justice. What we've also seen in the light of co-creation is how art has been seen as a bottom-up, well, a grassroots driven process, free to access, and in that sense, we could also think about, well, to what extent has the inclusivity been reinforced in light of COVID-19? There's also an element of contestation, the second C in this list, contestation through safer spaces. Also in light of a global pride, we've seen that those who often are, well, find threshold in expressing their identities in the offline world, well, they can participate through their bedroom, so to speak, so to contest social norms, heteronormativity in self-created safe spaces. And there is the element of commemoration as well. So whose life are commemorized, whose lives are represented, and those kinds of questions about representation. A Global Pride 2020 is a particularly compelling event again, and it has taken place on the 27th of June. So that's very recent. And so in the element of intersectional solidarity is highlighted here. At the same time, this all-togetherness sometimes also raises a question about performative solidarity. So to what extent is the situation of marginalized populations really addressed by policy, legislation, and so on and so forth? And we see the same type of question in the Black Lives Matter movement. The co-president of Interpride argued that, well, people around the world are still very much isolated, LGBT people, but in the Black Lives Matter movement, we've seen an emphasis on people of color's lives. And this is an example, bcbeingblack.com, how the lives of Black people are shared by podcasts, so in a very creative way in the online world. As a final note on the revaluation of public art, we've seen an empowering of the publics, the grassroots. We see how we've moved even further beyond institutional spaces, where do-it-yourself practices are promoted, where boundaries are more and more broken between the artist and the amateur. And we see also a reinforcement of inclusive publicness, but at the same time, there's competition for attention, there's competition for representation. Not everyone is connected to the internet in the first place. So what about the digital divide that may have been reinforced? And also, as the final note, we want to ponder on the role of institutions in the post-COVID-19 world. So finding a new way in the future as an institution vis-a-vis the grassroots that have become more and more digitally connected. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Martin, for this very specific reference to current situation in what's happening in public space and how we have to understand also these kind of tensions that we experience every day in all our streets. And the reference, of course, goes to the Black Lives Matter that is creating a wave actually in many other countries, not just in the US. So now we move actually to US, to Susan Moffat, and she is the program director of the Global Urban Humanities Initiatives based at UC Berkeley. And this initiative is a joint venture between the UC Berkeley Arts and Humanities Division of the College of Letters and Science and the College of Environmental Design. So it's a very brilliant collaboration between many different scholars and practitioners from different fields, so not just architecture. Thank you, Susan, for joining us. And yes, you have the floor. You have to unmute yourself, please.
There we go. Can you hear me all right now?
Yes.
All right. And go back. And can you see my screen all right now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to be talking about a place that is a piece of public space at the urban edge that is, I think, uniquely resilient in times of pandemic and protest. It's a landfill on the edge of San Francisco Bay. You can see that it's directly across from the Golden Gate Bridge. And it's about 4 miles northwest of the UC Berkeley campus, if anyone has been there. And this is a landfill that operated from 1963 to 1983 as a landfill. And it sticks out about a mile into San Francisco Bay. But because it never was capped, the rubble remains exposed. And so it has been used by artists for decades as a creative space where art and nature come together freely. And people have built large sculptures out of found materials from the landfill and that wash ashore, and that often make really creative use of the natural environment at this location. It's also been an intensely contested space. It was home to a community of otherwise houseless people for a number of years. And this community was evicted in 2014. But the nature of this space, which is separated from the relatively nearby neighborhoods by a tangle of freeways, so it has always felt somewhat isolated. It's been a really terrific space for performance, and also a place that is very dense with memory. The place it's about 30 acres, or I guess that's something like 12 hectares. It's completely covered with shrines and memorials. And the nature of the art is that it's always changing. So anything that is made is going to be altered by other people. So kind of dynamism and anonymity and DIY is at the heart of the nature of the Albany Bulb. So the trails, the benches, the amenities, everything that's there has been built by the users because it has not been managed until very recently. It's owned by the city, but it was not managed, and they had no interest in investing in it because the city has been trying to give it away to the regional park district for years, and the park district doesn't want it. So it's because of this limbo that it has been in a creative and liminal space. But after the eviction of the homeless community, we saw that if the regional park district took over the space, that through a stricter management regime, the creativity could be destroyed. And so I founded with other artists an organization called Love the Bulb that sought to demonstrate the value of this kind of loose space. And we created festivals, dance performances, theater, participatory art projects, community gatherings, all in the interests of demonstrating the value of this kind of loose space. And we created new art installations and commissioned them, but the whole point of the new art was to encourage the creation, the continued creation of the uncurated guerrilla art. So it was, our intention was not to replace, but rather to try to nurture the existing character of the place. So this spring, in April and May, we had a wonderful collection of exhibitions and performances and all kinds of programming planned for April and May, of course, and it was called, ironically, Altered Territory. That was the name of the series, but we had no idea just how altered our territory would be by the pandemic, so we had to cancel everything. And so we turned to putting things online. If you go to our albanybulb.org website, you'll see some of these performances that are now, we filmed them and put them online. Art workshops, we altered them so that they could be done by people at home. But the main thing that has happened since the pandemic started is that the Albany Bulb has just been an incredible godsend for the community, because it's been a place where during the lockdown, it was still safe because you could socially distance to be outdoors. And so at a time when the galleries and museums and theaters have been closed, it has been a place where people can continue to go and see the art, and where people have continued to leave gifts for people. And this is an example of one piece of art that's its function has changed a little bit. It was hidden in a kind of grove, and it's a confessional box. And before the pandemic, it was a place where people would leave their secrets for each other about their kind of deepest, darkest secrets. After the pandemic started, it became more of a place where people talked about where they were going during COVID. And then, of course, we had the uprisings against police violence that were precipitated by the death of George Floyd and so many other African Americans and Black and brown people. And of course, the uses of public space were transformed. And in places like Oakland and so many other cities, when the stores were boarded up to protect the windows, it became an incredible canvas for expression. At the Albany Bulb, too, there was a great tradition of political art and protest. And more recently, I and other artists have begun using the spaces of the bulb to create a memorial for victims of police violence. And one of the most interesting things about the space is that it's unexpected. People come out to walk their dogs or bird watch, and they come upon these memorials that kind of highlight the way that Black lives have been devalued and have the number of deaths have piled up in the same way that the debris has piled up here. And it's been really interesting to overhear, as I'm painting, overhear the parents try to explain to their children who these people are and why they were killed. And it's been a very moving experience to watch parents struggle with that. Let's see, I just want to show kind of the context through a video of kind of, it's just a few seconds that shows kind of the location and how this memorial relates to kind of the other space and gathering spaces of this park. So it's right next to a major trail, and so people just kind of come across it. And people have made their own responses to the memorial. For example, there's a tradition of leaving stones at Jewish graves, and people just started leaving stones at this location. So I think what this space of the Albany Bulb shows is that when a public space is less managed, when it's rough, when it's a place where nature and the urban edge intersect, and when people are able to create their own spaces, it provides a space for conversation, for dialogue, for debate, as well as a place of solace and rest. And it's just been really interesting to watch this particular space perform as public space in a particular way in crisis. And if anybody's interested, we have more information at these locations. And because the art and the activities are always so evolving, if you follow us on Facebook, you can kind of see the participation and the evolution of the space that is always going on. So thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Susan, for this very personal and human approach to places by bringing secrets and human touch to the meaning of public space. Now we move to Australia, and I think we will explore a completely different perspective with Luc Hespanhol, who is a lecturer in design and computation at the School of Architecture, Design and Planning at the University of Sydney. Thank you, Luc, for joining.
Thank you, Luisa, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. Yes, I'll take a slightly different angle to the topic. As Luisa introduced me, I work at the University of Sydney as a research and a lecturer in urban interaction design. I deal a lot with what we call digital placemaking, which is utilization of technology or digital technology for making of places, for transformation of public spaces, and creating new experiences for people to come together to socially interact in public spaces. This is the kind of thing I do. This is a space in our campus in the University of Sydney that we designed as an experimental public space for research and teaching of digital placemaking. It exists for a couple of years now. This is an event we had last year. I designed part of the space. I designed this media facade, the lighting installation. I designed the content for the light installation that's there. And I have also been teaching using this space and doing research with my students. This is something my students created last year, kind of an interactive game that was on for a couple of nights last year. And we have different content every night, showcasing what the students are producing, what some of my colleagues and myself are producing. And the whole point is to create this ever-changing public space that people can congregate during the night. In particular, it used to be a quite rundown and unsafe space within the campus, but it's a very busy place near one of the main gateways to the campus. So that has been what has driven this experiment, and it has been quite successful. Or it was being quite successful until the pandemic hit, but I'll get that in a moment. So one of the things I've done and as part of our development of that space is this little vignette of a pulsing heart, which plays in between other artworks created by my colleagues and students. And it's just like a very quick, short vignette of a pulsing heart saying, almost like the public space expressing to people, I love you, we are welcome here, and good things are going to happen here. So, of course, when the pandemic hit, the whole point and meaning of that space evaporated. Classes went online, everybody went to work from home. Nobody was supposed to be on campus for many weeks. So I continue to have creative work displayed in there, but of course, there was no one to watch. So the best use I thought I could make of that space was we have a projector in place there, so it was to turn that pulsing heart vignette and play that every night, intermingled with public health message, just positive and lightweight message, just reminding whoever was there to go back home for a while, and wash your hands, and we're all in this together. This is all for the benefit of everyone, and so on. And that has been played in that space every night since mid-March here in Sydney, which when we went into lockdown. And although we are now starting to walk away from lockdown, it's still not entirely resolved the situation here in Australia. This is a low density place, is in the middle of the campus. So if, of course, the content is playing there, but if nobody is around, that's the meaning of the space kind of disappears, as I mentioned before. This is not the case everywhere in the world. So if you live in a more high density area or high density city, even if you stay at home, you're still partaking in the life of your community, of your neighborhood. You are seeing your neighbors sometimes in their apartments across the road. And I've been following the phenomenon with a lot of interest around the world. And I'm originally from Brazil, so I've been following the situation there quite closely, which is not very good, as you may have heard. My whole family lives in São Paulo. But one of the interesting things that I noticed is this phenomenon, this emergence of projections, urban projections, people who have access to equipment from their apartments, projecting messages of a range of different topics on buildings across the street and to everyone else around to see it. Many of those messages are political. I mean, there's a very serious political crisis going on in Brazil, and people protesting against the government and the president, who seems to be in denial of the whole situation. So many of the messages are political, but they're also more lightweight and soft messages like this. This guy who is curating a series of animated drawings done by children, and he got them, received the drawings by children, animates and projects that, which is a very beautiful kind of digital storytelling project in very difficult times, projecting something that I mean, can warm your heart and tell something, human stories, remind us that there's still people within the apartments, they're still living their lives. But by following those people over there, I come across this festival asking for contributions for the same sort of things that I started to do here in Sydney. So like messages, humorous or lightweight public health messages, and with using digital art to be part of those projections in the city. So I got in touch with the curator, and I got that my little vignette that I have done here in Sydney that probably nobody else has actually seen, I hope, but projected to lots of different people, both in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And that is part of this movement that has also found expression in different mediums, different media over there. So for example, stenciling on the streets, I found it's extremely interesting and has been become quite popular. Groups go around in different streets around São Paulo, for instance, and the same sort of nature for those messages, reminding people that we are going to get through this, and we just need to stick together a bit further. But from a design perspective, I find it quite interesting that the utilization of the city as a canvas and this triangulation of messages, both in terms of digital messages and projections, but also through stencils, and telling those ever-evolving story for everybody around to see, and to see from their homes as well. This is a sort of teaching that I do with my students. It's very hands-on, when you normally articulate those same sort of concerns in digital ways, in interactive ways with lighting and electronics. And of course, we couldn't do this year, so we adapted. We went online, and we did like a Zoom-based exhibition. I created the software platform to enable students to exhibit from their location, wherever they were. We have students in Australia, in India, in China, all exhibiting at the same time, but most importantly, to allow others to socially interact real time through the artwork, through internet, with the artworks created by the students. So retaining that exhibition kind of ethos. And interestingly, and 2 slides to go. Interestingly, most of the concepts came about with articulating stories like human-to-human memories, and this almost like artisanal or crafty work that you would normally do in public spaces, but articulated through an online medium and digital medium, which I found quite interesting. And finally, this is a new work done by one of my PhD students, prototyping with Google Street View, the use of urban robots and potentially social robots that could go through the city and connect people in case we find ourselves in this situation again, but also in terms of public disasters and fires and floods, for instance. So we're starting to make use of this condition that we didn't want to be in, but we found ourselves in, and to be creative and push innovation. So finally, this is my last slide. I see those are the 2 main aspects impacted by the pandemic in my field, citizen expression, so which people have responded by utilizing the city as a canvas and articulating messages throughout the cities, and also in terms of the interaction using virtual public spaces and mixed reality to retain this notion of social interaction and enabling citizen expression and interaction, albeit not necessarily on site, but also in a hybrid space. And I think those are lessons that we can take in the future to improve our relationship with public spaces in an augmented way. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke, for presenting this very smart way to use digital technology and be creative in public space. I would like also to announce during this webinar, but it will be officially out very soon, that Luke is our new section editor at the Journal of Public Space on a section entirely dedicated to digital placemaking. So I hope we will collect a lot of research activities, but also project outcomes that you are developing, as you were showing during your presentation for the Journal of Public Space, because I think you're right. I mean, we have to learn from because what happened during this lockdown could be an opportunity for us to improve more the way we understand and live the public space.
Thank you, Luisa.
Thank you again for joining. So now we move to the next speakers, Giulia Gualtieri and Viviana Cordero from Huasipichanga, which is a creative collective that was established in Ecuador, but is now also currently active in South America and Europe. Thank you for joining. You have the floor.
Thank you, Luisa, and thank you for inviting us, for inviting me and Viviana for this nice opportunity to share our work. So as Luisa introduced us, we have been working in the Netherlands and Ecuador, and we mainly focus on urban development in public space through participatory practices. And in particular, we often look from the perspective of children. So we try to involve children as agents for change of communities and of public space. That's why today we wanted to start with this question and address you this question, because it's one of the thoughts that we have when the lockdown started. Among all the difficulties that we faced, we also thought, what does it mean to a year without public space for children? Because we, of course, always look at things from our own perspective, but we have all been children, and we all know like how precious was the moment that we could finally run outside and just be in the park, on a public square, on the street with our friends, and we could just not have the eyes of our parents on us, and we could create our own rules. We could have a moment of freedom or a moment of independence. So I think this is also reflected in these pictures from this article from The Guardian that we also want to share. These are pictures of children from Spain that after 45 days finally of lockdown, finally could run out on their streets. And as you can see, like they're going crazy on their own with their parents, and they finally can run or ride their bicycle, especially now that the streets are almost empty. And this is one of the thoughts that we have had during the beginning and during all this period of lockdown. How can we actually still reach the community, especially children, through our work? And one of the solutions that we found was, first of all, to collaborate with other organizations around the world that also have a similar focus as ours, so about community and public space. So one of the collective that we reach is the Exploradores de la Ciudad from Mexico City. They also work with children, and they developed this booklet which touches the topic of mental health, the lockdown and pandemic, and private and public space from children's perspective. And thanks to this collaboration, we also we contributed by disseminating the booklet and translated in all these different languages, starting from, of course, from Spanish to English, and then Italian, Dutch, and many others that you can also find on our website. But I think the most important thing about the booklet is that directly is addressed for children. So we asked them to become explorers, not anymore of their city, because now it's not possible, but of their own house. And at the same time, the booklet has also, I think, a very strong educative value, since it teaches children about what is the pandemic, what is a lockdown, what's the virus about, but also it gives them a moment to stop and reflect what are their feelings, what are their needs. And this also is very helpful for parents, because often it's hard to explain those feelings of like stress or anxiety, especially in period of difficulties as a pandemic. And a part of having this educative value, I think it also, it's really fun, and it gives a possibility to children to do different activities. At the same time, we could collect and gather a lot of data from them, because the booklet is also a social media campaign. So we asked and then parents and children to share the pictures of these activities while they were doing it at home. And one of them, for example, the second exploration of the booklet is to build your own den. So we have some pictures here, for example, from children mainly from Mexico and Colombia. And as you can see, these children often do not have their own bedroom, their own space. So with this activity, they had the possibility to recreate a space for their own, a space for privacy, and a space for their own freedom to create their own rules. And seeing the result of a few of the results that we got from the booklet, we also understood how much housing actually is important. And that's why I also want to share with you this statement from UNICEF, from the Handbook on Child Responsive Urban Planning, which states that more than 1 out of every 3 children in the developing world does not live in adequate housing. And this is also one of the reasons why it brought us to focus on co-creation of public space with children, and it gave us also the strength to focus on this topic. And we realize in this period also that there aren't many countries that have proposed or applied policies in relation to housing and children and public space, of course. And just one last slide that we wanted to show you, I think, is this screenshot, which is kind of the following step of the booklet. With the collective Huasipichanga that we have colleagues both in the Netherlands and in Ecuador, we decided to recreate a public space environment, a virtual one, with children. So children from different countries. These are all Spanish-speaking children from Ecuador and Mexico that had the possibility to meet online and share maybe the activities that they did through the booklet or just their own feelings. And as you can see, like in the top right, there is our colleague Carolina. And although a bit hard to recognize, we have also Bernarda on the top left of the screen, which through a Snapchat application, we managed to mute her into a green frog. That was really fun for the kids and was really entertaining for them. And I think from this activity, the main outcome that we learned was that actually children are not aware that there are so many kids around the world passing through the same situation. So this was a bit of a shock to learn. And at the same time was also a good lesson for parents to learn what are actually their children needs, and what could be a good way to approach them and talk about certain topics that often is not easy to address. And we hope to go back to the field as well, of course, but we learned a lot from rethinking and recreating our own creative practices. And we thank you very much, and we look forward for the discussion.
Thank you, Giulia, for bringing this very important perspective from children that, well, probably suffered a lot from this long period of lockdown. And I mean, it is important that we are aware that we have to take care also of some vulnerable groups, especially when dealing with social engagement, social interaction, and being very sensitive regarding different issues related to people in different conditions, as also other speakers mentioned before. So now we move to other speakers in the Netherlands, Bas and Floor, who run this amazing festival. I like the title very much. We love public space. And I've been following them for a while. And so I'm happy to have them today with us. So Bas.
Hello, my name is Bas Sala. Together with Floor and Ron, I organized the Wheel of Public Space Festival. On the 25th of September, the 4th edition of the festival will be held. I'm going to tell you something about the festival, and then Floor is going to tell you something more about this edition. It's a festival without a big budget or a production team. Our goal is to get professionals in art, design, architecture, people from the municipality, citizens together and talk about their love for the public space. And it's a really simple concept for the festival. It's so we set up 10 rules for the festival that we use to organize it. First of all, the most important thing, it's a festival and not a conference. That means that things will be different. It's going to be in different locations. We prefer bars, etc., because they already have a permit to organize things, and you don't have to organize your own permits. We don't ask entrance fee. We don't do reservations because that costs time. Every year there's a new theme. This year it would be activism in public space, but we changed it due to the coronavirus. And it's a simple, simultaneous program. We have central start, an ode to the public space, and a central finish. And in between, we have 3 simultaneous programs of half an hour, and which consists of 20 minutes, a lecture, Q&A, a performance, and then a 10-minute change. It's an international festival, and from the beginning, we use video conferences to give people a podium to express their love for the public space. And if there's any money, the performing artists should be paid first because normally they don't get paid. So this is an example of a starting of the festival. This is Zebracki, who's expressing his love for the public space. We do conferences and they look like this. So really simple, just put some chairs there and ask somebody to present their work. This is a dance performance during the festival. Guulia gardening, a Q&A. This is an excursion to a nearby location that you can visit and is explained. Music, opening of the Zoo sign. Video conferencing, this is Lina Labor from Estonia. Speaking word, so some parts are inside, some things are outside. This is our identity that hasn't been changed. It's always the same, only the color changes. And we bought some banners, hang those and called it a festival. And of course, we do interventions. And in the end, we have, for example, this is last year, performances and eating landscape as a sculpture. So now to Floor, and she will tell something more about the implications of the coronavirus on our festival and how we changed the program of the festival due to the coronavirus.
Yes. Do you see me?
Yeah.
Yes.
You see the screen? Okay.
Yes, we do.
Okay, well, I will introduce the theme of this year, which will be public space in limbo, or maybe even better, flux, because we feel it's very important to and essential to celebrate a public space right now and pay tribute to her resilience. And let me just put this on. Yes, better. Let me just put this on hold. And what we want to focus on is also maybe the positive effects of the crisis. For instance, social distancing, it causes public behavior to change. evidently. And how will this affect public space as a place for spontaneous meeting? Will there be a new urban etiquette, which will be not, no handshakes, but more visually, for instance? And there's a discussion right now in the Netherlands that a lot of designers are coming up with solutions to solve the problems in the 5 feet society, as you would call it, solutions for social distancing. But we think that it's maybe better to first observe what is happening, and these observations show what dormant needs or issues maybe are popping up through the crisis, that the crisis makes visual before starting to design for it. So we put out an open call and for observations, and I do want to invite everybody who is watching also to upload their observations, because we are doing our own observations, but they're only in the Netherlands and in Rotterdam specifically. So it would be nice to be to have observations from all over the world. You can do it via the website. And we started to observe interesting phenomena, and not just observe, but also interpreting. So what do we see here, and what is going on? What is exactly happening here? And for instance, this is a park, one public park, that was closed during the crisis. And this was done because there was illegal gathering of mainly youth. But if you think about it, public space and specifically public parks can function like as an antidote in a crisis like this, not just for sanity walks, but also to meet other people, for instance, at a safe distance. And the irony, of course, is also that public parks, being the lungs of the city, that they were closed, and that a prevalent symptom of COVID-19 is shortness of breath. So this, I find this quite ironic, to say the least. Another observation we did is the social circle strategy that was first applied in New York, in Brooklyn, and it soon went viral, as you can say, all around the world. Also, Rotterdam has adopted this strategy. And what is interesting to me is that how can you look upon this? Is it for the authorities a way to say to people, hey, you're outside the circle, so you're opposing the rules, and I give you a fine? Or is it just a ludic form of crowd control? Because if you look at the next image, crowds instinctively tend to keep their social distance, to guard their social distance. So the crowd knows in a way perfectly how to control itself. So this is something that was quite interesting to us. And another one is, for instance, well, let's see, these images from Rotterdam. The municipality allowed entrepreneurs, owners of restaurants and bars, to extend their businesses into public space to make up for the revenues they lost because they had to be closed. And what is interesting about this is that these temporary pop-up pellet terraces are makeshift constructions and made with pallets and sea containers. And you could say that these are materials that belong to the material of Rotterdam, it being a harbor city. I also want to show you one of the works and the website of one organization, an initiative that we asked to present at the next festival. And it's called Publieke Werken Rotterdam. And the idea behind the initiative is to use billboards. In Rotterdam, you have a system that has billboards for cultural events. And since all the cultural events were cancelled, these boards were standing empty. And Public Works, Publieke Werken, did an open call for designers and artists to send in a piece. And these were printed on H0 posters and spread around the city. And the opening will be tonight. And it's very interesting because as these posters are spread all around the city, the artist can invite people to come at their poster and have their opening there. So tonight, all over the city, people will gather at the sites where these posters are displayed and celebrate this event, you could say. And it's a good alternative for public space as an alternative location for art, since museums are closed or very limited in how many public they can admit. One last contributor I would like to share with you is Tape Measures, an Instagram account run by an artist from Singapore, and she just documents all the tape measures we see all around the world. She's focusing on Singapore. And Singapore is, of course, an interesting place because it has a public space that is very regulated. And you see that these tape measures are done by amateurs, and you could see it also as a form of amateur art in a way, or a public space hack. There will be more contributors, of course, but I will leave it with this, and will want to invite you to join the 25th of September. Part of the festival will be online. Thank you very much.
Thank you for presenting this festival. Very exciting, actually. I'm not sure I can attend because of these travel restrictions, but if it's online, I will for sure attend. Thank you. Thank you. So now we move to the last speaker, Linda Di Pietro from Italy. Linda is running these how can I say, she's an entrepreneur in cultural design and cultural production. And she, if I'm not wrong, and she is affiliated with her work at Indisciplinarte, based in Terni in Italy, to In Situ, which is the European platform for artistic creation in public space that we already hosted artists and art curators affiliated to In Situ in our first webinar. So I'm glad we are hosting Linda today. Linda.
Hello, Luisa. Thanks a lot for your invitation. Can you hear me well? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, super. Yeah, first of all, just to say a few words, I'm now in this moment changing post. I've always been working as a cultural manager for dismissed spaces that become cultural centers. I'm still on that level, but I'm working for a place called Base in Milano. So it's a huge old factory and we are starting a program of work on artistic and content level. So it's a good news because the network can also go bigger, let's say. I share the screen. I try to, okay, good. So what did we do? Basically, the network was born on the necessity, the urgency, the desire of artists overall to work on a public art dimension, democratic dimension, and the overnight shift of the COVID challenge, of the COVID emergency, of course, created a huge reflection moment. Someone says it was healthy to stop, but actually everything that is forced is not healthy, in my opinion. So it was useful maybe, but not healthy to really stop in terms of all the work that we've been doing, all of us talking at this moment have been doing in these years on the public space. This is the network through a map, so you can see who is part of the network. Is divided between members, affiliated, and associated members. This is actually a little old because we won a new cooperation program from this year. So it's going to be a little bigger, actually, and more complex. I will tell you something about later. I see whether there's, okay. Here you see a little video where you can understand what kind of projects we propose, we program, we curate, we accompany. What is the specificity of the network is that we are so many and so different and so diverse that the response to the local situation and the national situation has been very different from each of our perspective. And this was very important. This was very useful because we could learn from the others. We could learn how to really be more connected from local to global level. So you see here, there are several diverse dimensions that we tackle through the network. I will go faster so that we have more time to talk about the actual theme of today. Yeah, so In Situ was created in 2003 and was created by Lieu Public, which is a national and European center for creation in public space, but it's been growing and growing. And actually, the new actions we are developing now are together with the residencies and the MOOC, the open line course, which was very useful during the COVID emergency. Many people actually applied and many people asked us for the course. It was a moment of also interesting rethinking of the course, which was very much connected to how public space was before. So it was also interesting to work through what we have been doing before the emergency. As I told you, we are working on a very diverse type of countries and members, which contribute in a very diverse way, also exploring diverse cities from very little inner cities, especially like, for example, in Italy, I was part of the network from a city called Terni. Terni is a post-industrial city in Umbria, so in a very remote area of the country. From Terni to Amsterdam to Urol, which is a festival in the north of the Netherlands, which our other guests might know very well. We've been involving a lot of artists, and This was very helpful when we got to the COVID emergency, because we had a large amount of artists we could ask for interesting conversations. So what we've done was not doing projects, trying to reconvert into digital, try to rethink and reshape. At certain point, some of the artists started also to rethink the shape of their productions. But was interesting, we had several talks and conversation from projects that could still happen in public space, even if other people could not see them. And I will show you very briefly other that are being rethought to reach audience where they are, so the digital, and new projects that are on the way to respond to, that they were already on the way to respond to the changes of our society, the social distancing, which we already were experiencing, especially in remote parts of Europe, the need of gratitude towards the workers that have been working in this situation, and the rise of social and economical inequalities. The most relevant issues we've been talking about with the artists, the more than 200 artists we've been asking for feedbacks and creating conversations with, was, of course, are we going back to normal? Do we really want to start back? This is a question we are asking to ourselves now as well. Do we want to start back, even if nothing really changed? To mend and connect the social and physical body was another issue very relevant. To be careful of the misuse of the pandemics by the populist wave, to rethink the issue of mobility, and to question digital space as a democratic space and as an artistic space, not just as a mean. So this, for example, is a project I told you before. This project was actually happening, even if during the health emergency, is the vigil from Joanne Layton in Graz. And Joanne created a spot for one person at a time to be vigil to the city, to look over the city, to take care of the citizens. So every 12 hours, one person was going to the top of a hill from Graz, overlooking the city and taking care of the city. And this could go on, and actually is going to go on until the end of December, and is going to involve more than 700 inhabitants from the city of Graz. This is an image from Lotte van der Berg Building Conversations that you might know. Lotte has been working on a digital version of the conversations, which at the beginning I was really afraid of, because I thought it's never going to be like the one we experienced live with Lotte. But actually she created very original and authentic rules for Zoom, for example. So while I was saying, please switch off your microphones while I'm talking, she would say, no, please switch on your microphone. I want to hear your, the noises of your house. I want to hear your breath. I want to be with you in this digital space. So she tried to re-evolve the rules also of the conversation. And the very last project she's done, which I think is romantic and very touching, is one way to touch each other in the nowadays condition, is to wash each other's hands. Because if we wash each other's hands, we can touch through the soap. So we are kind of not in danger, and we are taking care of each other. The last project I'm talking about, and then I give you the link, you can look through the projects online, is Radio Local. Is I think that the radios have been replacing the public space in these last months. A lot of projects, a lot of artists have been working on a radio version of their work. Also in Italy, we have a new radio in Teatro India in Rome. Many old style, traditional means of communication like the radio have become new ways of communicating. Radio Local is a project from Hunt and Darton that was online at the Norfolk and Norwich Festival a couple of months ago, and you find the link on this slide. There's a link at the in situ page where you can see all the other projects, Walkie Copenhagen, Robo Selfie, a lot of other creative ideas that I would love to share with you, but the time is little. Yeah, what I would like to, just to end, to conclude, is that we understood that it was important at the moment to create a new way of European networking. So the European network was really a safe net, a net of safety that we had during the COVID. We could share resources, ideas, and reflections. What we are now trying, the step forward that we are now trying to do, is to create this net not online, through a real transversal cooperation, not just between artists, academics, and programmers, but also opening the decision table, the decision desk to health workers, to teachers, to people that have been dealing with real issues during the months of pandemics. So the next step is to create this broader real life network. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. Yes, if you can stop sharing. Yes, so that we are back to the gallery view where you can see all faces of our speakers. Thank you for these very insightful and very rich presentations that you provided. I think that we have learned a lot about how to be into creative and artistic production even during these difficult times. I was taking notes while you were all presenting, and I started to write some keywords because I would like to now engage you all in roundtable discussion. We do not have so much time, maybe just 10 minutes. But as we announced on the webpage of the webinar, this roundtable discussion would be about reclaiming public space as a space for democracy, freedom of expression, and civil rights. So I was taking notes, as I said, and I would like to point to some of the keywords that you were mentioning. Togetherness, publicness, tensions, isolation, violence, personal views, human touch, care for vulnerable groups, the democratic and artistic space, and digital technology. Since I'm into architecture also with my non-profit organization, City Space Architecture, I was very much inspired when the title of the Venice Architecture Biennale was announced several months ago. As you know, the Venice Architecture Biennale has been postponed due to the pandemic to the next year. But still, the main theme of the Biennale, I think it is very timely now, because the title is How Will We Live Together? And if you read the curatorial statement by the curator Hashim Sarkis, he actually try to discuss how to imagine spaces in which we can generously live together in these difficult times, in a context of widening political divisions and growing economic inequalities. So I think the pandemic has made clear that we are actually living very hard times for public life, public engagement. This is not something that we can always depict as something nice, something beautiful, something happy, you know, being in public space. But there are some criticalities that we have to face when we address public life and how we can be in the public domain and interact with others. So following your presentation, I'm not asking questions actually, but if you want to share some reflections also following other speakers, you know, point of view, that would be very nice also to try to find a common ground among all of you, so that we have like final remarks from all our attendees.
Yeah, well,
who wants to start? Yes, Martin, thank you.
Okay. One element I would like to highlight is this relationship between structure and agency. So the control over space, be it digital space and or offline space. And this is also what Flor highlighted in terms of this park that was shut, and it was this ironic metaphor of being the lung of the city, and then it's a good place to breathe, and precisely that was closed for the public. But how can we reclaim spaces that now are additional control by authorities? And in particular, how can minorities deal with the situation, and especially those who are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19? In some spaces, not only the offline but also the online is under very, very strong restrictions, like LGBT minorities in China, for instance. They are not only facing restrictions in public space, but also digitally. So we need to put in this specificity in dealing with dealing with the implications of COVID. But the thing I wanted to highlight as something that I think crossed our presentations is this relationship between structure and agency, and how COVID-19 has reconfigured this relationship.
Well, I would like to also say something about freedom of expression. Because if you look at that phrase, freedom of expression, you think about, for instance, freedom to express a political opinion, exactly that. And I was talking to somebody a few weeks ago who said that the Black Lives Matter movement and demonstrations, they caught on energy just because of the lockdown. He claimed that before the lockdown, before Corona, these demonstrations would not have taken place so massively. So it was not just Black Lives Matter they were demonstrating for, but also they were reclaiming their right to the street, to public space. And this was not consciously, but unconsciously. I think this was really a very underlying, powerful energy.
That's a great comment. Yes, there was this vacuum space that was taken by Black Lives Matter movement, indeed.
Yes, and another thing on freedom of expression is that what I was trying to highlight. This is not just, demonstrating, but also manifesting yourself in public space by, for instance, taking a little piece of it to build this terrace. Of course, the municipality still you had to apply for it, but still it's about transformation and ownership also. And this is positive. I think municipalities, at least here, they, as opposed to closing down public parks, they also allow more freedom in that sense in public space.
I would like to comment on that because I think it's very interesting, but as we work with children, for example, you sometimes have freedom of expression, but the language you're using, it doesn't come across to other groups. And I think that's very important if we use the art or the creative field, because I am a very, passionate supporter of minorities. And sometimes when I talk to other people that are more conservative or so on, they don't understand what I'm talking about and they don't know the words. And it took me, for instance, time also to understand some concepts that may be part of the, of this new paradigm. So I think this is a very important part, answering to what Luisa said, like how do we live together in a way would be like, how do we communicate to each other in a way that we can understand each other? So I don't know, from our perspective or from our experience, children have this very simple way to say things, very direct way to say things. And it's been very useful for us when we used to work outside in public space for children to explain what we were doing. So everybody in the adult population would understand. And I think it would be a nice idea also to translate it to the digital world as well.
Yeah, I want to build on that. I mean, would there come a tactile turn? I mean, this tactile engagement that is so important in art, or the offline interaction. We're all imagining a future where the digital will be even more important, even more reinforced. But don't we think so that live interactions can never be replaced by any digital or online or digital technology? And this is also discussion that is going on in the academic world. If we can organize webinars like this, that takes away the cost of the environment and traveling to the other part of the world. So what's the added value of face-to-face interactions? But you're now mentioning children, but I mean, humanity, I think, needs face-to-face interactions. But to what extent can we negotiate the role of technologies in this to take away some of our pre-COVID-19 habits of traveling all around the world? And yes.
I think that leads to a point about kind of hybrid methods and about the combination of the digital and the online and the outdoors and in person, which I think Luke's presentation in particular highlighted. And I think many of us are coming across this in the design of our courses that reflects what we are doing in the rest of life, which is, in our case, in the program that I run, we won't be meeting indoors in classrooms, but we will be meeting on Zoom, and we will be doing things outdoors in the field, kind of getting the best of both worlds. But the access to this hybrid structure, just to get back to your point, Martin, of structure and agency, the structure of people's time is as important as the structure of their space, right? So to the question of, why was the response to police brutality so broad in the US right now? Part of it, I think, is that some people have more time than they would have otherwise, but there are very large numbers of people who have less time, whether they are frontline workers or the people who keep our electricity on or do all the essential work that we do. So I think looking at the question of time in everything we've been talking about and who has time is going to be really important if we're going to be attentive to equity and access.
I wanted to
Sorry, go ahead. No, I just want to make a quick point about that as well, and I agree 100% what Susan just brought up in terms of the reorganization of time and space that has been brought up by this situation, but also building on the point that Marty made and also Viviana. I think one thing that was really highlighted by this whole situation is that there are way more people like us out there, and us means anyone. It made much easier to connect to people. I mean, the explosion of the fragmentation of public space and the explosion of online venues, but at the same time, they highlighted the specialty and the uniqueness of human-to-human connections and what kind of human-to-human connections actually to value. So washing your hands together, like the beautiful example that Linda brought up, for instance, or drawing together with children, for example. So those, what kind of interactions that we used to have, but we probably didn't put so much value on as a human right, actually, that now have been taken away, and they can be revalued and reorganized and restructured going forward. I think this is the key learning that we should probably take and reflect upon going forward in reinventing our lives.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a link to what Luisa said at the beginning, a provocation, like to suggest a self-exercise, to imagine that if we are in 2040, and instead of asking ourselves, how will we live together? We ask ourselves, how did we live together? Is the question we are asking. 20 years ago, the Architecture Biennale was supposed to open. At that time, the curator was questioning, how will we live together? And actually, the pandemic was not the crisis. Climate change, social injustice, economic collapse, everything was colliding at any given moment. The assertion to find new ways of living together was a necessity. So how do we, in 2040, remember that Biennale that never happened in 2021, or that happened in 2021? I think it helps us to not live in uncertainty, but to think to a proximate next future with the eyes of the very last future, very far future.
I think that brings up resilience, something that also that I mentioned in my presentation about the resilience of queer communities and to deal with the situation as is. But what you're saying, Linda, is very interesting indeed. So how do we remember this episode, and how do we think we were resilient, and what can we learn about being or becoming more resilient? Yes.
Thank you all for the comments. Anyone else would like to add some additional comments before we see if there are some questions from the audience?
Yeah, well, I'd like to say something. In the end, it's a health crisis, and the health crisis also is a nature crisis. And in our presentations, we didn't reflect so much on that nature is taking over some parts of the city, for example. Again, I read an article about the water quality in Amsterdam yesterday, that you can see through the canals to the bottom, and that there are more species now coming into the canals, which is good for the environment, which is good for everything, actually. So it also brings back the discussion about how we could live in our cities and in the public space together with a natural surrounding. And in the end, if you talk about resilience, I also think that it's not only healthcare, but it's also the way we almost, especially in the cities, try to ban out nature, which is of course, especially in the Western world, which is of course something we should reconsider. And that's not on top of it's not on the focus point now, but I hope in 20 years that we will see that this also changes the way we organize and design our cities in a more natural way.
I would like to add something on that, because I also think it's very important. And I don't think anymore that we could talk about democracy if we're not talking about sustainability in that sense, because we should think about democracy also for the future generations and for our generation who's already suffering the consequences of climate change. And for instance, in Ecuador, and this is something that's happening right now, so it'll be nice to share with you, but in Ecuador, we have rights for the nature since 2008. So any citizen can sue the state or whoever is harming the nature. And I think this is a policy that should go worldwide. But in Ecuador at the same time, for instance, the health crisis is so big and everybody has so much attention on that other groups are taking advantage of this to, you know, start exploding national parks and oil and so on, because the attention is elsewhere. And it's very hard for the civic society to go and sue the state and so on. Still, there are a lot of groups who try to do it. And yeah, when we talk about democracy and public space in general, in what we supposedly own collectively, I think nature is a very special element to take into account.
Thank you everyone for bringing very insightful comments to this roundtable discussion. Fen, would you like to check if there are some questions from the audience?
Yes, if we still have time, I think maybe we can discuss one of the question is, the question says, during the lockdown across the world, local states strengthened some regulations to protect health while at the same time losing others. So isn't that this question later is asking about now, isn't like the lockdown is, should the deregulation of public space continue to foster or sustain the everyday creativity that we witness for now? Or will the state seek to return the heavily regulated and surveyed space immediately? So it seems like ask about maybe later is, for me, I feel it seems like the lockdown maybe will continue for a little bit while, because in a lot of places they just opened and they met more issues and they lock down back again. So, but if the lockdown could be eased later, what will everything happen? What do you think? And yeah, or will that affect like all this creativity we create will not be continue, or will be changed, or will be intervened by the state's power because they want a different direction, maybe like rehabilitate our economic development, like these things?
Oh, that's a really interesting question raised here. I think there will be more anticipatory power and there will be more planning for the unplanned. So I think at all levels, we'll be learning about how to embrace the unplanned, a crisis. So that's a swift comment I want to make.
Yes, I would also like to make a comment that it's our responsibility, the speakers today, for instance, and all the speakers at the other webinars, to highlight not only the negative effects, but also these positive effects that the crisis, puts out into the light. And so I think there's a big responsibility for us here.
I think that the structure of governance across different kinds of public space has had an impact. So, for example, in the Bay Area, we have state parks, we have city parks, we have regional parks. And when the state parks shut down, then it squeezed a lot more people into the regional parks. And so there was some competition or some complaints among these different jurisdictions or governmental organizations about how stricter regulations on one side impacted others. So I think, especially in a place like the United States, where governance is so fragmented, that questions of power and control, they can't always be predicted. So even if one agency wants to increase its control or plan for the unplanned, as Martin said, it's not possible to control everything when power is dispersed in that way.
Something positive in Ecuador, for example, is that although there are a lot of regulations on how to use the public space during lockdown, I think it's the first time that the state takes into account placemaking. They realize that this is definitely a quicker, lighter, cheaper approach, and in crisis, creativity also arises. So I think that in many ways, people were being creative in order to maintain their businesses, for example, that for a lot of people is on a daily basis on the street, and the government also, well, or some governments at least from different cities took this into account for the first time. So there are also positive things about how a mix of bottom-up and top-down regulations came into power for the first time.
I wanted just to make a little reference to also another conversation that I had in another moment with Luisa, for example, because we're working together on a project about creative Europe and creative practices in Europe. So we also face a lot of difficulties in these last months to reorganize everything, how to collaborate, but as well as to develop our project in Bologna. And there was, with all the partners, a very low mood of how to actually keep going and bring the result that we wanted. So all this situation brought, of course, a lockdown, a mental lockdown as well for creative practices. But at the same time, as Vivi was also mentioning, I wanted to say the same thing. Often in hard times, there is actually the best practices and the best artistic practices happening. So as usual, we always work, and we are immersed in a system with certain rules, and we have to play with those rules. Now we have some other more rules to take under account. So the game is changing a little bit, but it's in this moment that I think the creativity can also be boosted once you pass the moment of difficulties at the first time, of course.
Well, I think that with this webinar and with these amazing speakers, we are trying to give some inspiration and to rise the mood and try to be positive, and hopefully everything will be fine. This is what many in Italy keep saying, tutto andrà bene in Italian, everything will be fine. So we cross our fingers, we stay resilient, and through artistic creation, we try to also work on human values in public space. So thank you very much to all the speakers. Before we close this webinar, my colleague Hendrik maybe wants to make a small announcement. Hendrik?
Yes, before we thank again everyone who has participated, I just wanted to mention again, as I did at the beginning, the next session will be on exploring the interplay of the analog and the virtual realm and its effects on public and social life in cities. I think it might be an interesting session. There are various platforms at the moment in terms of social media and linking up neighborhoods, both commercial ones and also more bottom-up and non-profit. And there's a whole kind of world out there that we haven't discussed so much. We have discussed a lot on online Zoom teaching or communication and so on, but less on these kind of social media platforms and so on. So we will do this in the next session together with friends from the University of Stuttgart and various speakers from different parts of the world. So I hope you will tune in for this again. And also from my side, I want to thank very much on one hand the attendees that joined our session, and of course all our panelists for this kind of very colorful and very inspiring presentation. I think always these kind of sessions on innovative approaches are very fruitful and inspiring for me, and also thank to Ying and Stephanie and Luisa from our team. So thank you very much, and soon you can also, everyone can see those videos, also the latest one then on our YouTube channel. So thank you very much.
Yes, on the YouTube channel of City Space Architecture. And subscribe also to our newsletter to receive information regarding our videos and to get invitations for next webinars. We are running also the 4th series in August. So we are actually resilient here on Public Space. And we also have surveys, and we have a call for speakers still open. So we always try to engage the audience and to collect as much as possible from the theoretical point of view and practical and artistic point of view to know more about what's going on public space during this year, actually, without public space. Thank you again all. So. Bye.
Very much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Ciao. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.